Thank you all for watching and supporting my videos. Your encouragement keeps me inspired to create even more content. My next big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I can't do it without your help. If you enjoy what I create, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. Now, let's dive into the stories. The evening in New York was lit by neon signs, the reflections of lights bouncing off the wet asphalt, as cold and fast-paced as any regular day in the city. Alex Martin, a seasoned and somewhat worn-out congressional aide, walked toward his office in one of the government buildings, feeling the weight of political pressure squeezing his chest. He had worked here for over 10 years, but recently, the atmosphere had become more tense, with shadows of unspoken alliances lurking around every corner. The late hours were his time to work in peace, away from the chaos of phone calls, memos, and meetings. But tonight was different. As Alex entered the dimly lit building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The usual silence in the hallways felt more suffocating than ever, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He unlocked the door to his office, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above him the only sound. As he sat down at his desk, his phone buzzed. A single message flashed on the screen: "We need to talk. Urgent. Meet at 2 a.m. It was from someone he hadn't heard from in over a year. Senator Samantha Hayes. She was one of the most powerful figures in Congress, and their past was tangled with politics, compromises, and secrets. Alex had always been cautious around her, sensing the darker side of her ambition. But this message was different, urgent, cryptic, and unsettling. His mind raced as he tried to remember the last time they spoke. It had been a heated disagreement over a bill that could have changed the course of American politics. He had walked away from it, but she hadn't. She had gotten what she wanted, and Alex had always wondered what she had given up to get it. After hours of hesitation, he decided to go. There was no going back once you got involved in this world, and he knew that meeting her would change something, but he wasn't sure what. He glanced at the clock, almost midnight. Arriving at the designated location, a quiet bar in the East Village, Alex felt the tension in the air. The place was nearly empty, save for a few late-night drinkers. He looked around and saw her sitting at the back, a glass of whiskey in front of her, her eyes scanning the room as if she were waiting for something, or someone. He approached, and she looked up, her face expressionless, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. "You came," she said, her voice low. "I came. What's going on, Samantha?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow sip of her drink, letting the silence linger. "There's a storm coming, Alex. One you won't be able to avoid. You've been too close to the fire for too long. They know you've seen too much." Alex frowned. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Samantha leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. "The people who run this country, the ones you've helped, the ones you've worked for, they have their own agenda. It's not what you think it is. You're a pawn in a game you can't even comprehend, but you're getting too close to the truth. And they'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." His pulse quickened. "What secrets? What do they want with me?" She looked over her shoulder, as if making sure they weren't being watched. "You're the key, Alex. You always have been. But there's a price. You want to know the truth? You have to be ready to pay." The tension between them was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Alex sat back, trying to process what she was saying. She had always been a master of playing the game, but this felt different. "What are you asking me to do?" he finally asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up and handed him a folder. "You'll figure it out. But know this, once you open that file, there's no turning back. You'll be part of something bigger than yourself. And if you're not careful, it'll consume you." Alex took the folder from her, feeling the heaviness of the paper in his hand. As he looked at her one last time, she gave him a final, cryptic smile. "Good luck, Alex. You're going to need it." He walked out into the cold night, the weight of the folder in his hands, his mind racing with questions, doubts, and fear. The world of politics was never as clean as it seemed, and tonight, Alex had been reminded of just how dark and dangerous it truly was. And now, there was no going back. As Alex stepped out into the chilly New York night, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The weight of the folder in his hand seemed to grow heavier with every step, the paper almost burning through his fingertips. He wasn't sure what Samantha had meant by the truth or why she thought he was the key, but something in the way she spoke, so deliberate, so cold, told him that this was no ordinary political game. He walked back to his car in silence, his mind replaying their conversation. The city felt strangely distant now, the lights blurring into the background as he focused only on the folder. He needed answers, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he didn't want to know. Once you start digging in politics, there's no telling what kind of mess you'll unearth. And yet, the idea of being involved in something bigger than himself, it was a strange pull he couldn't ignore. In his car, he hesitated for a moment before starting the engine. The folder was sitting on the passenger seat, mocking him with its secrecy. He couldn't drive home with it, not yet. There was too much to process. He pulled over to the side of the road, under the faint glow of a streetlight, and opened the folder. Inside were a few pages of documents, along with a flash drive. The papers were filled with names, dates, and locations, government contracts, political donations, and obscure references to private meetings and off-the-record deals. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a collection of standard political paperwork. But as he scanned a few of the documents more closely, a pattern began to emerge. One name kept appearing: Jonathan Brooks, a high-profile lobbyist with connections to key members of Congress, including several senators Alex knew personally. But there was more. Beneath the surface of the contracts and meetings, there were mentions of financial transfers, offshore accounts, and whispered deals in foreign countries, things that, if exposed, could bring down entire careers, even the government itself. Alex's heart rate picked up. This wasn't just politics, it was something far darker. Something illegal. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop, his hands trembling as he waited for it to load. The files on the drive seemed to confirm everything he'd seen on paper, but there was one file that stood out, one labeled Project Eclipse. He clicked on it. The screen flickered briefly before the document appeared. It was a plan, dated just a few months ago, outlining a covert operation involving several top-ranking officials, including names Alex had known for years. There were mentions of secret negotiations, offshore accounts, and a proposed bill that would funnel millions of dollars to a private defense contractor with ties to foreign governments. The operation was detailed, and the final note in the document was chilling: complete by 2025. Alex's pulse raced as the realization hit him. This wasn't just about political power, it was about profit, power on a global scale, and a game of influence that reached far beyond the borders of the United States. And somehow, he had been caught in the middle of it. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was another message from Samantha: "Get out. They know you have it. It's already too late." His stomach dropped. He quickly closed the laptop, grabbed the folder, and shoved it into his bag. Panic set in. He couldn't trust anyone, not even her. But who was he supposed to trust? Alex knew he had to leave the city. Whoever was behind this had eyes everywhere, and he couldn't afford to be a target. He needed to figure out who else was involved, what exactly they wanted, and how to protect himself. But one thing was certain: this wasn't going to end well for anyone who got too close. He looked out of his car window into the empty streets. The city had never felt so cold, so distant. The weight of the decisions ahead pressed down on him. Alex had crossed a line, and now he had no choice but to keep moving forward. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it would become, but there was no turning back now. Alex drove aimlessly through the darkened streets of New York, the familiar cityscape now feeling alien, as if he were an outsider in his own world. He needed time to think, but his mind was racing, the magnitude of what he had just uncovered pressing down on him like a weight too heavy to carry. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him it was important. He answered. "Alex?" The voice on the other end was familiar, calm, steady, and unflinching. It was Sean, a former colleague from his time on Capitol Hill, now working as a private consultant in Washington, D.C. "Sean, what the hell is going on?" Alex's voice trembled, more from the tension than fear. "I just gotta look at something. I don't know how to explain it. People are involved in things that they shouldn't be. I need to understand what I've gotten myself into." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a brief silence before Sean responded. "I've been watching you, Alex. Watching closely. This is bigger than you think. The people you're dealing with. They're not just politicians. They're part of something more dangerous. Something that could ruin everything. You can't trust anyone in that world, not even me. Alex's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Who can I trust? I'm going to tell you something you won't want to hear, Sean continued. You're not the first person to get tangled up in this. But you're in a position now where they're going to start watching you. If you keep digging, if you keep asking questions, they'll make sure you disappear. I don't say that lightly. I'm trying to warn you. Warn me about what? Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. They've been pulling strings for years, Alex. The deals, the operations, it's all about influence. And money. But there's something bigger behind it. Something that reaches well beyond Congress and Washington. If you want to get out alive, stop looking into this. Walk away before they find you. Alex gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He had never heard Sean so serious. It wasn't just a warning, it was a plea. But Alex couldn't walk away. Not now. The truth had already begun to unravel, and it was too late to ignore it. Sean, I can't just stop. There's something they're hiding. I don't know what, but if I don't keep going, I'll be part of the lie. I have to find out what's really going on. Then you're a dead man walking. Sean's voice was bitter, resigned. But don't say I didn't warn you. The line went dead before Alex could respond. He sat there, frozen for a moment, the weight of Sean's words sinking in. He had always known that politics was dirty, but this was a whole new level. It wasn't just corruption, it was an operation, a game of international power and wealth. And it was going to consume everyone involved. He had to find out more. He couldn't back down. But the question was, how? He couldn't go to the authorities, who would believe him? His own connections could be compromised. It felt like he was in a race against time, and every second he waited was another second they could use to cover their tracks. Alex glanced at the dashboard clock. It was nearing 2 a.m. He needed a place to think, a place where no one could find him. His apartment wasn't safe anymore. Too many people knew where he lived. A ding of an incoming message interrupted his thoughts. It was from an unknown number. Meet me at the Lantern. 3 a.m. Don't bring anyone. The Lantern was a dive bar in Brooklyn, known for its privacy and discretion. It was a place where shady deals and whispered conversations happened in the dim corners. If someone was meeting him there, they were either part of the game or trying to pull him deeper into it. He stared at the message for a long moment, weighing the risks. But in the end, his curiosity, his need for answers, won out. He had to meet them. The drive to Brooklyn felt longer than it was. The streets were nearly empty, and as Alex pulled into the parking lot behind the Lantern, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He parked in the shadows, cut the engine, and stepped out into the night air. The faint buzz of neon lights above the bar made the night feel even colder, as if it were warning him to turn back. But he didn't. Inside, the bar was nearly empty, save for a few patrons nursing drinks at the far end. In the corner booth, a man sat, his back to the door. Alex walked over, every step feeling like it could be his last. The man turned as Alex approached. He was middle-aged, dressed in a sharp suit, and his eyes were cold and calculating. Alex recognized him immediately, Victor Hayes. A political fixer with ties to some of the most powerful people in the country. If anyone knew what was really happening, it was him. "You're late," Victor said, his voice low but firm. "I had to make sure I wasn't followed," Alex replied, taking a seat across from him. "I don't know if this is a good idea, Victor." "What is this about?" Victor looked around the bar, his gaze sharp and measured. "It's about your future, Alex. You're in deeper than you think. Samantha sent you the file, didn't she?" Alex nodded. "Good. You're already on the right track. But you're not the only one looking. There are people with much more at stake than you, and they're not going to let this go without a fight." "Why are you telling me this?" Alex asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Victor leaned forward. "Because you're not the enemy. But if you keep digging, you will be." He slid a small envelope across the table. Inside is a list. Names of people who've been involved in Project Eclipse. You'll find some surprises. Alex stared at the envelope, his heart racing. This was it. The chance to finally uncover the truth, or to make himself a target. "Take it," Victor urged. "But remember, Alex, once you've seen it, there's no turning back. You'll be marked." Alex reached for the envelope, his hand steady despite the chaos in his mind. He wasn't sure where this road would lead, but he knew one thing for certain: there was no way out now. Alex left the lantern with the envelope in hand, his thoughts swirling in a mixture of fear and anticipation. The cool Brooklyn air did little to clear his mind as he stepped back into his car. His fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the envelope, knowing that the contents could change everything, either exposing the conspiracy or sealing his fate. Once he was back in his car, parked in a secluded spot, Alex took a deep breath before ripping open the envelope. Inside was a list of names, dates, and locations. But what stood out most was the last line: Project Eclipse, Final Phase, Execute by Q2 2025. The names on the list were startling, some of them familiar from his years on Capitol Hill. There were senators, lobbyists, even CEOs of private defense contractors, people who, at first glance, seemed unconnected but who, in the shadows of Washington, were all pulling the same strings. As he read through the details, Alex's heart raced. These weren't just high-stakes political deals, these were orchestrated, calculated actions with implications that stretched well beyond American borders. A network of international influence, black market arms deals, offshore money laundering, all of it was right there in black and white. The final phase of Project Eclipse involved consolidating control over key military assets and weapons technology. The scope was enormous, and the people involved, powerful, untouchable. But then, one name caught his eye, one he hadn't expected. Samantha Hayes. She was at the heart of it. Her name appeared in the final section of the list, tied to meetings in foreign capitals and communications with some of the most dangerous figures in the world. Alex felt the weight of the realization hit him. He had trusted her. She had been the one who'd warned him, who'd sent him down this path, but now it was clear: Samantha Hayes wasn't a whistleblower. She was a player in this global scheme. His phone buzzed, breaking his focus. It was an encrypted message from Victor Hayes: "They know you're involved now. Get out. Don't trust anyone." He glanced up from the list, his breath catching. It was becoming clear that his worst fears were true. He had been a pawn all along. But it was too late to turn back now. Alex's mind raced. He couldn't trust anyone, not even Sean, not even Victor. He had to find a way to stop this, to expose the truth. But he also knew that, with each step he took, the danger would grow. There were people who would stop at nothing to protect the operation, to keep their secrets buried. He turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life as he began to drive. The night seemed endless, the streets stretching out before him like a maze, each corner hiding its own set of threats. He had a few options now, but none of them were safe. The first was to go to the authorities. But even if he managed to find someone trustworthy, how could he prove the scale of the operation without risking his life? The second option was to leak the information, but that would require using the media. And the media was just as much a part of the system. Could he trust them to get the truth out, or would it be buried like everything else? But then, as he passed a familiar building, a government office, one that held files and confidential documents, an idea began to form. He could make copies of everything, take it to the right people in the media, and ensure it couldn't be ignored. He had one shot at this. It was a long shot, but it was the only one left. Alex turned the car around, heading toward the office building. He knew the risks. He knew they'd be looking for him, trying to silence him. But he couldn't stop now. Not when he had the power to expose everything. He wouldn't let them win. As he parked in front of the building, he took a final glance at the list, the names, the truth that had been buried for so long. He was standing at the edge of something huge, something that would shake the foundation of the government, the global political landscape. He grabbed the folder and the flash drive, heading toward the entrance. But as he reached for the door handle, a car pulled up beside him. His breath caught. It was too late. The door opened, and two men in suits stepped out, their faces cold and stern. Alex froze, realizing they knew exactly who he was and what he had. "Alex Martin," one of them said in a low, controlled voice. "You've been a problem for a while now." Alex's pulse quickened, but he stood tall, gripping the contents of the folder tightly. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You've been digging in the wrong places," the second man said, his tone threatening. "It's over. Hand over the files, and this can end without any more complications." Alex knew the game was up. But there was a glint of defiance in his eyes. He wasn't going to hand over the evidence. Not now. "Make no mistake," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't over. You won't be able to cover this up. People will know what you've done." The men exchanged a brief glance, and then one of them pulled out a gun. The cold metal glinted under the streetlights. Alex took a step back, his mind racing. He didn't have much time. He couldn't fight them, but he could run. With a burst of adrenaline, he spun around and sprinted toward the alley behind the building. The men shouted, giving chase, but Alex had the advantage of surprise. His heart pounded in his chest as he ran through the narrow alleyways, weaving through the city's underbelly. He could hear their footsteps behind him, growing closer with each passing second. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. He wasn't just running from them. He was running toward something, a future where the truth would finally come out. A future where the people who had been hiding in the shadows would be exposed for what they were. And as the city lights faded behind him, Alex knew this was only the beginning.